I'm gonna start with this statement and I'm gonna end with this statement. Materialism comes from people who ain't never had shit. That's who affects. That is who materialism affects. People who never had shit. Now I was thinking about things that attracted me to like Colombia and why I fell in love with Colombia, and then what made me fall more in love with South Africa. I was sitting back thinking about you know the women that I've met in Colombia, and I was just thinking about like what did I appreciate about certain women. I appreciated the women in Colombia that spoke English because I didn't really have to force myself to speak Spanish, even though I could speak some Spanish. I appreciated a lot of women, that went to the gym. Obviously, the beauty. A lot of them being able to cook, loving to cook. So it was a lot of things like leaving the U.S. I fell in love with as it pertains to Colombia. Like I said, I'll repeat. A lot of women speaking English, going to the gym, keeping themselves in shape. Arguably some of the most beautiful women in the world, and definitely great in the kitchen and love cooking. And so many things. And then, you know, going to Africa for the first time, specifically South Africa, as a black American, indulging in, the Latin culture, music, so many great things. Going back to Africa, it made me realize things about being, coming from a black culture. I started to like miss a little bit. The just the way we laugh and joke, understanding. South Africans, for example, listen to a lot of our music. They know the words. They know a lot of our shows. So I was just like, man, like, so you start to realize that you miss a part of, a part of you. And even though that I've primarily dealt with Black Colombians or Afro Colombians, they don't have a Black culture. They just have a Colombian culture with Black people in it. So you don't really have those, let's say, pro-Black conversations, or you don't really have those conversations about um about oppression and racism, even though it exists. But there's a lack of conscience um in Colombia specifically. There's also a lack of conscience in South Africa to a smaller extent as well. So, and I'm gonna catch up on the comments in a minute. So I was thinking like, man, what made me love, South Africa? And I was thinking about, I was comparing to Colombia, and I was like, you know what, like women I interacted with, they were more funnier for our sense of humor. The conversations was just more fluid. I seen some of the baddest bodies in the world. I mean, bad in a good way, like the most perfect bodies I've ever seen. Great personalities, fun, um, sexual, and then the culture, like the music, like I'm a piano. It just gives you that. It just gives you that energy, like hip hop does. For me. So I was like, man, they have a lot of elements of black culture that I resonate with in the United States. So I was like, so I instantly, gravitated, towards that. And today I've been thinking about like, there's just as many great things there are about South African culture. And what's great about South African culture and Black American culture is that we are cultures that drive Black culture worldwide. There's other cultures like Nigeria has an effect on pop culture too. But from a Black American perspective, South African culture, um, I would say we vibe more than we would, let's say, Nigerian culture. We just have more similarities with South Africans than we do with Nigerians. So, not to exclude them, but you know, we just have more in line with South African culture. So, I love being a part. I love being on a winning team. I love being on a winning team. So, being in the United States or being an American, we're on a winning team. And when I felt, what I felt about South Africa, I was like, you know what? I'm on a winning team as well. You know what I mean? Drivers of pop culture, dope women, very attractive women. Even though I would say that, I feel like there's more attractive women in other places than the US, but we do have a lot of attractive women in the US. Um, so many similarities. The struggles. People respect how we overcame a lot of struggles. A lot of people respect how South Africans overcame a lot of their struggles with the apartheid. So there's just so many things. And what is sad is, and the reason why I wanted to just rant about this is, the sad thing is that we have so much dope things about our cultures, and we ruin it with materialism. We ruin it. I think about how other cultures or certain classes, how they date and marry within their class or their culture because they feel like their culture is so dope that they don't want to, they want to keep everything like in house. They want to build on top of everything they built, which makes a lot of sense. You know, Theoretically, when people look at Americans and they look at us from a class standpoint, a lot of them be kind of confused culturally because they feel like rich people marry rich people. That's how they look at Americans. Like, okay, if you're a Black American, I would think you would want to be with your dopest counterpart, a Black American woman. From a class standpoint. In South Africa, you could say the same thing. Like, South Africans being with South Africans. What you see now is you see a division in relationships, unfortunately, in the US and in South Africa amongst its men and women. Women in South Africa are having the same complaints as women in the United States, and men having the same complaints in the US as South African men having for South African women. One profound thing that South African women said about South African men was they're stingy and cheap. Not necessarily broke, even though they're, a lot of them might fall in that category, but they use the word stingy. And the type of men they end up gravitating to in South Africa are Nigerians. The same dynamic exists in the United States, where a lot of black men are called stingy or cheap because a lot of us do have jobs and do make money. We call stingy and cheap. And then a lot of the black American women will, aka Portia, for example, they'll gravitate to, let's say, Nigerians that are more generous when it comes to women. Very, very similar similarities. I even seen clips, and I'm gonna, react to it one day. That they were saying some South African men have become passport bros, and I'm just like, wow, South African men becoming passport bros. Another thing I seen in South Africa, similar to the U.S., is that Barbie movie. When that Barbie movie came out, I seen like a viral clip of like all these women lined up to watch that movie, just like I saw in the United States. When I was just in South Africa in December, a lot of women I came across, it was just like, what are you gonna buy me? Can you buy me a bottle? Everything was like, everything was about money, about princess treatment, about if we go out, can you buy me an outfit? And I'm just like, why is it? Because we can't blame everything on feminism. We can't blame everything on liberalism because you don't see the level of materialism with white people. And that's what, and I started to think about that. I was like, okay, why are not all, but why are certain groups of black people, so materialistic opposed to our white counterparts? And the short answer is that white people in general are used to having shit, and black people not used to having shit. And that's what, and that's the similarities between South Africans and Black Americans, is that we finally, we finally made it to a certain degree, financially, economically, and now a lot of us want to enjoy the fruits of our labor, or the labor of our ancestors, which is understandable. There used to be a song by Juvenile, you know, acting like a in never had shit. And that's how we act. That's how we act. Like we never had anything. I didn't see materialism in Colombia and the black community. And I think it's because it's always been this inclusive society. And then also, I'm gonna use Colombia for example. They're not influenced, and a lot of them are sheltered from black social media. And conversely, they don't have they just don't have the economic opportunity like that. So materialism is definitely rooted into never having anything, and that's how a lot of us act, especially our women, South African women, Black American women. you know I see women. It's crazy, right? You know how you act like when you haven't how a person acts when they haven't had anything. They get greedy. I've been on dates with women in different countries with black women. We'll go to a restaurant and they'll order more food than they know they can eat. Like their eyes get so big, and it's like you acting like this. You acting like this is like your only opportunity to like go out to eat somewhere nice. Like they eyes get so big. Um, a lot of women just let's say meeting them, and maybe they want me to bring a gift or bring something nice, and it's always like trying to get as much as you can in that one encounter or one visit. It's like it's basically greedy. And it's like, why are so many of our women are just so greedy? Like, why is everything treated like this is the only this is the only opportunity, the last opportunity, or I have to seize the moment because it might not come again. Like that is a very bad mindset to have. It's a very bad mindset to have. You know, and it's sad because people, groups of people that are elite, and I see Black Americans as being elite. I see, you know, South Africans as being elite in their own respective way. Like, elite people can do great things if they build families, work together, and it could be so dope when we're united. So it's a shame that in the Black American community, the most powerful country, the most wealthiest country in the world, the most powerful Black people, the most wealthiest Black people in the world, we can't even build on what we built. We can't even build greater families. Like, we are hindering our process. We should be so ahead of the game where we're as just as elite as, let's say, the Jewish community, which is a minority community. You know, certain Asian communities in the United States that are elite, and they're minority communities. So minority communities can be elite. And, you know, a lot of people always want to point blame at different sexes, but I gotta put the blame on our women on being so materialistic. Like, I get it. There has been decades, centuries of envying white women, having jewelry, being treated nice, being treated like princesses, having everything they want. And Black women finally want to feel what the white woman has always felt, you know, having nice things. You see it is materialism in the Asian community as well. So I mean, I understand the desire to finally have something, you know, because what the oppressors used to say was that, you know, we've enjoyed all these luxuries, but it's not really all that. I do it sometimes. You know, people that want to come to the US, I might be like, you know what? The US is great, but you're not missing out on anything. You really don't have to be here, which has some truth, but in actuality, I got to experience the US. Some people haven't. So for me to say, like, you don't have to experience that or experience this because you're not missing out on nothing, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, I'm kind of playing the same role as the oppressor, saying, you know, you can miss out on this because it's not really worth it at the end of the day. So I'm saying all that to say is that I get it. I get it that women need to have their decades, their centuries, whatever, of being spoiled and being held, being held on a high standard, but it should never come of at the expense of disposing your men. You know, even when, even during the time, I mean, it's always been, you know, white women having luxurious things, having material things throughout history. I haven't heard of white women disrespecting, not needing their men, the ones who provided and built those material things they have. Because one thing Kevin Samuels used to point out is that the purses you wear, the machines that make the purses you wear, the engineers, the mathematicians that made those machines, the people that educated those people, those engineers, those mathematicians, most of them has been men, overwhelmingly men. So when you don't need a man, men have created all the luxurious things that you enjoy. That view from a 40-story condo overviewing the sea. You know, that glass of wine you enjoy. It took science and math to figure that out. And a lot of men bust they ass, use their intellect, fought wars to provide women with these luxuries. And now we just have a lot of women that don't appreciate or are ignorant to the sacrifices men make to afford them the material things and luxurious things we have today. So I wanted to just get that off my chest and just really point out like materialism setting a lot of us back.